What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the first ever episode of the Footnotes podcast. That's right. We're going to try something a little new. We're going to try something a little bit different, at least for the season of Lent. Who knows if we'll keep doing this or not. We want to make sure that we're producing and creating things here at the church that are actually useful, actually helpful to folks. And so we're going to try this out and see if this is one of those things. The Footnotes podcast is really simply an admission that every single week, whenever we as preachers write a sermon, there is far more that does not make it into the sermon than actually does make it into the sermon. We end up cutting way more than we end up keeping. And so we had this thought that maybe one of the things that might be useful, something that other folks might find really helpful, is sort of getting access to some of that stuff. Some of that stuff that we left on the cutting board, some of the scraps that we left on the table and we didn't put into the actual final cut of the sermon. And so, yeah, if you are someone who's ever walked away from a sermon and said, oh man, I really wanted to keep the conversation going. Like, I feel like that was a really good primer on something I've been wrestling with in my faith and my relationship with God. But dang, like I want to keep the conversation going. I want to dig into some more stuff. If you've ever felt that or thought that, then maybe this Footnotes podcast will be a good companion for you. Because what we're going to do is actually the format for this podcast will be the same. Every single week, along with, posted, dropped right at the same time as the weekly sermon podcast, you'll get a Footnotes episode. And the format, the structure of these episodes is going to be very simple, and it's going to be the same every single week. Every single week, we're going to give you three things. Number one, something you might find interesting. So this will be something that we discovered when we studied the text. Maybe it's a really important Hebrew or Greek word that really unlocks a deeper meaning about this Bible passage. Maybe it's a historical or it's a cultural context note that underpins the story that it's like, oh man, that didn't make it into the sermon, but holy cow, that really flavors and it texturizes this story in a whole new way. Maybe it's a theology piece, right? Like sometimes we'll talk about a particular theological doctrine during a sermon, but we can't talk about all the history of who was the theologian or what was going on in that time period in which they were living and doing ministry that might help us better understand why they taught and why the church established that particular doctrine at that time. And so, number one, the first thing you'll get of these episodes is something you might find interesting, okay? Number two is something you might want to try, right? We try every single week to make sure our sermons are practical, they're tangible, they give you, again, real life takeaways, real life guidance and advice and tips for things you can do differently and try differently in your everyday life. But we don't get to everything, right? We don't get to everything. I don't get to share every psychological study that I uncovered in building a sermon. I don't include in a sermon every single prayer exercise or spiritual discipline that could be a really good companion to that topic that we address in worship that day. And so although we'll try to make sure our sermons continue to be practical, we also want to give practical tips as a part of this episode. So something you might want to try will be the second thing that we'll do as a part of these episodes. So again, maybe it's advice in a different way to engage a relationship. Maybe it is a different spiritual exercise or discipline to engage your relationship with God differently. Maybe it's I don't know, maybe it's a tip for how you ought to restructure and rearrange your own mental life, your thought life, and your beliefs about yourself and about the world. And so that'll be a very practical part of the podcast. And then finally, what we'll wrap up every single one of these episodes with, something you might find interesting, something you might want to try, and then something I'm still wrestling with, something I'm still struggling with. One of the values that we have here at the Peak is we want to be a church that embraces doubts, makes room for the questions and the struggles in our faith. And so this will just be an opportunity for you to hear me as a pastor admit to and confess the places where this sermon still leaves unanswered questions for me and where it causes me to wrestle with God and struggle with God. Maybe it'll be in relation to a big theology question. I think of like the theodicy is the doctrine of how do we believe in a good God with also the existence of evil and pain and suffering in this world, right? I think that's a tripping point for a lot of us in our faith. And so this will be a space for us to maybe engage with some of that. Maybe there's a bigger thing going on in our country, a bigger cultural thing going on in our world. Maybe there's something in the realm of politics that doesn't necessitate my political commentary, but it does cause you and I to think about, well, how do we as people of faith, how do we respond to this present moment? How do we, as followers of Jesus, what does the gospel compel us to do or to say, or how does it compel us to live in the face of this? And so that'll be the format. Really simple, really straightforward, and it'll be consistent. Every single week, that'll be the same exact format we follow. Something you might find interesting, something you might want to try, and something I'm still wrestling with. And so, yeah, I hope it's helpful. I hope it's useful. I hope it gives you more to chew on, more to think on, and I hope it enriches your faith and your relationship with God. And it challenges me to continue to think about how we can live this life faithfully to Jesus in this present world. And so, until then, my friends, we'll talk to you soon.